Thank you for tuning in with us today. Our webinar today is brought to you by IAMCP Atlanta as a summary of the presentation from our May Lunch and Learn sponsored by RenovoData. I'd like to thank Chuck Cook and Collier Johnson and allow them to introduce themselves prior to diving into our content today. Chuck, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. I'm Chuck Cook. I'm President and CEO of RenovoData. We actually spun out of a Microsoft Gold practice that got its start in the mid-90s, and we are a mission-focused company. We have a lot of experience around disaster recovery, data backups, and continue to this day. So today's presentation is around the SMB and what nuggets they need. Collier, can you tell a little about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Cory Johnson. I'm a certified business continuity planner. I'm a senior consultant with RenovoData Professional Services, and I have about 30 years in the business continuity disaster recovery planning services area. Some of my previous employers have included IBM Global Services here in Atlanta and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Thank you, Chuck.
No problem. So I figured we'd just go over quickly what we're going to talk about. One thing you'll notice in this webinar is we try to reduce as much jargon as possible and share a message that can resonate directly with owners and managers of small and mid-sized businesses. So first we're going to go over recovery strategy versus recovery tactics. Then we're going to take a look at the elements of what's in a DR plan or disaster recovery plan. And then the difference between a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity planning and how those things differ. We'll also take a look at what does the planning process look like? And then from there, why do SMBs need a plan? And then some resources for them to access. So we'll jump right in it. We're going to talk about what's not a plan. And I've heard this question asked many times. Have you heard this, Collier? Well, I have backups. Isn't that a DR plan? It's scary, especially if it's the non-technical business manager who's in charge of making these decisions. And, well, my IT guy, he has backups. That's a plan, right? Well, it's not a plan. Restoring from backup is a tactic, and it is one component of the recovery strategy. To really understand DR planning is understand that you're trying to document a strategy, and the disaster recovery plan does that for you. So we'll take a look at the elements of a disaster recovery plan. Next slide. Yeah, there you go. Now, a plan can vary in size. Collier, how large have you seen these disaster recovery plans for larger organizations?
Well, Chuck, a lot of organizations may have a plan of just a few pages, 5 or 6, or maybe 20 or 30, but I've seen them up to several hundred pages.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so we could actually have multiple slides then of breaking out all the elements of a DR plan, but I think this was a good condensed version. So taking a look at the beginning of the plan, having the plan scope, why do we need a scope? Collier?
Well, Chuck, the purpose of a scope is to define exactly what will be contained in your plan. Say, for example, if you have multiple data centers, then the scope of this plan would be your data center at your corporate site. So we're putting a box around what is covered and what is not covered in the plan. That works in conjunction with a recovery strategy overview, which gives you an idea in general how the IT department plans to recover. Do they plan to recover within their own building, or do they have an alternate location that they will report to?
Excellent. So we're trying to reduce the assumptions, especially in a stressful situation, make sure they're not picking up the wrong document, right?
That's correct. Assumptions can always be your enemy in these situations.
So now we're looking at data collection and documenting critical people, whether they're vendors or employees, and then who's going to be part of the recovery effort. And we often call them the recovery team members. Once we have our people documented, we need to look at all the apps and the supporting infrastructure for those applications. Then where are we going to recover? The recovery site could be a second site that is owned by the company, or it could be a cloud vendor that's going to be your recovery. So how this looks can vary greatly between organizations. Next, looking at the recovery timeline. Now, I like to speak plainly, and when I think disaster recovery timeline, I often think of a conductor who's in the front of an orchestra, and you watch him waving his wand and cueing one section of the band to do one part, and then looking at the percussionist and cueing another section, and he's constantly turning pages. That's because the conductor has everyone's part written down, and so he has to turn pages much faster than someone with an individual part. So I always like to look at it that way because it is the big picture, and we're not going to drill down. If you're a technical person, you're mostly concerned with the technical scripts, which is the next section. Those are referenced here in the recovery timeline. They're just not part of it.
That's an excellent point, Chuck. A lot of these technical scripts have a tendency to be lengthy. And so just to keep the timeline in perspective, all we do is we refer to these scripts separately within a different part of the plan.
Gotcha. And then testing and maintenance. You know, we've seen organizations build their plan because of some requirement and put it on the shelf. They print it out in a 3-ring binder, and they haven't touched it in years. Talk to us about how often should you pull that plan down, knock the dust off of it, and actually see if it's still applicable to today. What do you think, Collier?
Typically, the industry standard for testing is a minimal of once a year, possibly twice a year is what we recommend. And along the way, companies will also have smaller tests or parts of a test or a tabletop test.
Sure. Excellent. Yeah, we've seen some organizations with critical data sets that do a spot test here and there, which might be more often than that annual big test, which tests the whole overarching strategy. Well, I think next let's talk about the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery. Collier, why don't you give us a high level, what is the core difference between these two types of plans?
Well, Chuck, with an IT disaster recovery plan, that's always focused specifically on the information technology department and the recovery of the services it provides to the business, such as servers, hardware, networks, databases, and those components. Where a business continuity plan deals specifically with the other departments in the business. Every department except for the IT department. And within those departments, it looks like what are the critical processes, who's required to do those processes, and what would it cost the company if you couldn't do that. Also, you start thinking about things like if our IT was not available, how are we going to do our job? What are our workaround procedures?
Gotcha.
So where a IT plan is specifically for IT, business continuity is based around each department within the organization.
So response planning for the rest of the company then.
That's right, and it's also provides a coordinated response. It's often based on a disaster like a fire or hurricane. and they typically take the employee safety as a top priority, such as an active shooter, things of that nature.
Yeah, we often collapse these things. Oh, I have business continuity plan. Well, no, you have a DR plan so you can recover your apps, but what about all the people that are in the other departments? So I get it. Have you, when you said life safety, are you saying that even things like evacuation plans could be part of this?
Yes, typically any kind of response plan where their people are involved.
Gotcha.
An active shooter or an evacuation from the building. Also, as a part of their departmental plan, then if they aren't able to go to the corporate office, where do they go? Do they work from home? Do they report to another building? These types of things are all considered within the business continuity plan.
Excellent. Well, thanks for helping us keep these separate and understand the difference between the two types of plans. Next, we're going to take a high-level look at the planning process. Again, we could have made this multi-slides and have a presentation just on process. But in a slide, what are the key things that an organization need to know? And so we broke it into the biggest three phases. Data collection, it all begins here, and it can stop here. We have seen this be a real challenge for organizations, especially if they have lots of people distributed in different sites and they're trying to get a handle on what apps are they using, where, in terms of a location, people, in terms of priorities, and letting someone have a vote, not just IT. IT may say, well, this app is critical to the business because no one can log in to the domain without Active Directory. Okay, that is true. But we've also seen finance department have a process that was so critical. If an application was not available, it could cost the company millions of dollars. And that wasn't even on IT's radar. They had an idea, but they didn't realize just how critical it was. So documenting the people, documenting the apps, and then prioritizing them allow us to move to the next phase. And we call that the tabletop exercise. Now, back in the day, Collier, we almost did these exclusively on site, like in a conference room. Now, we often do them over a WebEx or remote session, but just get everyone on one page and start documenting a high-level overview of what the processes look like to recover. And we usually bring the data collection form, create an estimate or guesstimate of what we believe is the right processes, and let the different team members discuss, no, this piece is critical because you cannot authenticate to this database without AD or whatever the other component might be. Now that we've validated the priority and gone through the tabletop exercise, that is almost as good as a test. And this goes far beyond what the average organization does. Having this exercise done allows us to go right into plan creation, and we can make this as thorough or as streamlined as the customer wants. Not all plans are created equal. Some organizations need to reference regulations that they're complying with, or they may want to break out the recovery piece from the overview of the company. And some people look at overviews of a company and say, this is marketing. I don't want this information there. I just want the critical pieces. So getting management and IT on the same page of what they want in their plan, draft that, and then allowing people to review it and edit it until it passes the test. Yeah, let's move forward. So, why you need a plan? Enterprises have been doing this for eons because they had to. When there's enough money at stake, all these things get done. But we find that small business, this is all trickling down to them. And let's face it, we are more dependent on data today than we've ever been. And we're seeing departments making IT decisions and buying apps so they can get through their day and move forward. So now if IT and management didn't understand that marketing or accounting are making decisions and buying apps to solve problems using their own discretionary budgets, now all of a sudden data is everywhere and people are not on the same page. So data dependency is the top reason you need to consider a plan. And then, of course, because you're so data dependent, a loss of these services could cause you to go out of business. We've actually seen with our own eyes organizations who have struggled because they lost critical data. And when you don't know who owes you money and you can't recreate that information, it's not just painful, it can actually cost you your company. Next area is customer driven. We have seen organizations, they're a small business and they're growing, and now they have an opportunity to win a contract with a large enterprise. And they're going to be a supplier for a big box store, let's say. And the purchasing manager asks for a copy of their plan, or at least an executive overview. Organizations who can't produce this are at a disadvantage. You can lose your bid. You might be the best vendor with the best price, but if you cannot help that purchasing agent check those boxes, you won't win that deal. So not only can you lose money and actually go out of business if you can't restore your data, but not having a plan can cost you the ability to grow. And regulatory compliance. If you accept a credit card, or if you're in business today, you are subject to some regulatory body, some regulation, some series of regulations. Collier, give us a little hint of how things have evolved with regulations like HIPAA.
Yes, Chuck. Things have gotten a lot more restricted today as far as HIPAA compliance goes. If you do not have a documented disaster recovery plan and a documented business continuity plan, and you're in deal with medical information, person's individual information,
Sure.
and you are not in HIPAA compliance.
And they used to just give you a slap on the wrist and maybe a little citation of sorts, but now there's teeth and there's fines.
That's correct. And also we even have new regulations such as GDPR for 2018, which goes into more detail about protecting individual privacy. So these type of regulations are beginning to affect businesses of all types, of all sizes. It's becoming really evident, Chuck, that today more and more every business is going to at least have some form of a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan, just to ensure that to the public and to the regulators that they are following compliance and regulatory guidelines.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, how about some resources? How can we steer people to help get a plan going? So you might have heard of Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. Having a little time, carving out the time, and utilizing those two tools can go a long way with getting things documented and then building a plan. Even if it's not a perfectly articulated plan, if you have some of the key components that we just reviewed in the plan, you'll be far and above beyond what the average small business has. You can also go online and do some searching. You can, if you're subject to some of these regulations, just search HIPAA high tech. That is specific around the ITDR. NIST also provides a world of resources around standards for your business and your line of work. You can also visit RenovoData.com. There's resources there, including a downtime calculator, which kind of is a rough calculator that provides people an idea of how much it would cost to be down in a day or for an hour. And you can also reach out to us and contact us on our website, and we'll give you a free Word template so you can get started on documenting these key components that we discussed. Now with consulting, you can spend as much money as you have. The big organizations, the big consulting groups that are known to the enterprise can come in and perform a business impact analysis for you, and you can stay busy for a long time and spend a lot of money. However, there are some, like ours, that focus more on the SMB with a streamlined plan to get them going without the enterprise price tag. Now, Collier, when we're doing consulting, some of the key things that we do, interviews, share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, typically our consulting engagements will come on site and do interviews with various departments and various C-level executives. We'll start to put some of this information we collected together and look at what kind of gaps that they may have and help them in documenting a resolution of those gaps, and then review the overall plan to make sure at the end of the day we haven't overlooked something.
Sure. So it can be to come in and review what they already have or start from scratch.
Sure can. Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. Well, that wraps up what SMBs need to know about recovery planning. Please feel free to ask us questions. You can reach us online on RenovoData.com, email us info@RenovoData, or call us. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. That concludes our presentation of why SMBs should have a business continuity and DR plan. On behalf of IAMCP Atlanta chapter, we would like to thank you both so much for the time that you've taken to share this information. It's obviously it's clear to us that you're industry experts and that you've shared just a portion of your wealth of knowledge, and we would absolutely encourage anyone to go to your website and kind of check out some of those resources that you mentioned and contact you. So thank you both so much for your time. We very much appreciate the information that you've shared and your support of IAMCP Atlanta.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.